Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Boris Worrell, and I'm the group.
I think it looks like Boris is frozen. I don't mind introducing just while Boris defreezes. My name is Jo Richardson. I co-chair the Gypsy Traveller National Forum with housing providers and other agencies. So Boris and I have been meeting as part of the forum for several years now. Started this out because we felt that we needed a housing provider perspective to bring a fresh perspective to the debate, so that it wasn't always looking to the advocacy organisations to be saying this is what the communities need. We wanted the housing provider voice very strongly in there. So we brought together the national panel, which Boris chairs and which I support with in a co-convener role with him. We've undertaken a piece of work, which you may have seen. Boris is back. I can stop filling. Boris, over to you. You're on mute.
What a great start, forgive me. Perfect time for my Wi-Fi to drop out. So I'll be as quick as I can, then we can get on to Jo. So there's a range of ways that you can get involved in the webinar today. You can use the chat function. Just remember to copy in attendees and panelists. You can also put questions on the Q&A chat box, and we'll be picking that up at the end with about 10 minutes, and we'll get all the panelists involved to answer those questions. Just a couple of housekeeping things really quickly. We are recording this session, and that will be available after the event. I'm going to quickly introduce the speakers now, and then they will hand over so that we can get through to the questions and give maximum time for the presentations. Got a great range of speakers today. We're starting off with Jo, who you heard from, who's an expert in the field at De Montfort University. Andrew Savage from Broadland will be talking about their experience delivering a site. We've then got a double act between Rachel from Elim and Naomi from Tain, talking about how they've managed sites and the learning experience they're going to share from that. And then a particularly interesting, I think, perspective from slightly outside the sector from Ellie Rogers at Leeds Gate, who's going to be talking more broadly about working with Gypsy Romani travellers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jo again to kick off.
So my name's Jo Richardson. I'm Professor of Housing and Social Inclusion at De Montfort University. I've been researching in the field of housing and social inclusion for about 20 years. Prior to that, worked for a local authority and a housing association on the front line, being a housing officer, and have also worked at the Chartered Institute of Housing. I'm also coming up, I'm going to be finishing my period as Vice President of the CIH, and will take on my own presidential campaign looking at preventing and resolving homelessness from the 1st of July. But here today to talk about Gypsy traveller accommodation. Broadly, the context, I think we all know it, but I've put a couple of bullet points on this first slide so you can see. We know that there's a shortage of appropriate accommodation. I would say about, well, there are estimates of how many gypsies and travellers in the UK live in sites compared with housing. Some people who are living in housing would like to go back onto sites. There are varying gypsy traveller accommodation assessments which show the picture across the piece. This isn't the only piece of data. There's also data on the number of unauthorised encampments. It's clearly the most beneficial thing, both socially and economically, for us as a society to provide rather than evict. People have been saying this for years and years and years. So none of this is new, but it's contextual information. So we know that there's a need for sites, and it's not impossible to deliver high quality sites accommodation. And that's what we hope to show in the report, which is the Sites We're Proud of report, which was published prior to this workshop. So hopefully some of you have seen that. there are some challenges, and we talk about that in the report, and you'll be able to ask questions about that, and you'll hear from housing providers who've done it. But it is entirely doable, and it has been done, and it needs to continue to be done. I'm very keen to talk about this as another form of housing. We're not travelling to Mars here. We are delivering gypsy and traveller sites, accommodation. It should be part of the remit of social housing providers to be able to deliver this, so that we've got accommodation for all of our members of our communities. It's not too difficult. There are clear links, as we know, and again, there is a lot of data about this, so it doesn't really need rehearsing too much, but there are clear links between accommodation, health, education and employment outcomes for gypsies and travellers. And I think we see this across the piece when we're talking about social housing and the provision of affordable, secure and safe housing for people. We know that if we can put a home at the heart of that, then we can go on, and that can be a platform for us living our fullest lives. So the social housing sector providers really need to come together, and we need to amplify our existing forum to share ideas and practice so that we can increase the supply of appropriate accommodation so that it meets demand. So the report that I've mentioned, it was a collaborative endeavour by the housing providers and other members of the panel. We compiled it because we were sharing ideas anyway, and we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could share this more widely, if we could say to housing providers, look, we've done it, we can do it, these are some of the things we're learning, please be a part of this. We very much took a what works approach, so this is a compilation of existing approaches to delivering and managing gypsy traveller sites. It is built upon some previous academic research, so whilst the piece itself isn't academic research, it's based on it. And this was research that I undertook with a colleague of mine, Janie Cadona MBE, who's part of the Gypsy Traveller community herself, and brought that co-production piece to the research, helped design it, helped deliver it. And it was funded by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, published back at the end of 2016 now, and it's online, I think, through the CIH. You can get hold of a copy of that. So we distilled some of the lessons from that Joseph Rowntree Foundation report and debated this as part of the forum, talked about how we could bring themes to some of the what works stuff that we were doing in the report, and we came up with 5 key success factors for site delivery. You can see them here, and in the report that there are a number of examples from different housing associations and providers looking at these different success factors. So the first one is good site design with appropriate facilities. If you've got a good site in the area and it's running well, if there is good community cohesion around the site, then it's much more likely that you will be able to deliver an additional site if need be. So if demand arises and there is an existing well-managed site, certainly what we found in the Joseph Rowntree Foundation report, that it just helps people understand what it's all about. People become neighbours rather than being seen as other, and it helps with that community cohesion piece as well, importantly, and it probably shouldn't need saying, but as well as being a decent place to live for those residents on the site. We think site delivery should be strategic, not reactive. There needs to be a local planning decision-making process to this, and it's certainly some work that I undertook, commissioned by Mid Devon, actually through the LGA. Looked a piece of work on planning for sites delivery, which is a more recent piece of work. And again, I think if you Google on Mid Devon website, you should be able to find that. The third key success factor, clear plans, policies and lines of accountability. This is really important. In the Joseph Rowntree report, there were a few issues where the left hand and the right hand weren't actually working in concert. And there was a lot of well, not a lot, but there was some Teflon desk, let's say, things being, referred to somebody else, not really a cohesive whole approach to it. And we think that there are some really great examples in the forum and in the report where not only are there clear lines of accountability and clear plans, but working with residents in order to build trust and to make sure that everybody's happy on the sites. The fourth success factor, good site management, clear process for repairs and maintenance, support for residents wherever necessary. This is all obvious stuff, but sometimes when it comes to sites management, this needs saying out loud. Sometimes these sort of quality mainstream policies and processes don't make it into some of the accommodation that's seen as slightly outside of the mainstream. So this should flow through all of the accommodation that's being delivered by housing providers. And then the fifth and final key success factor for site delivery is on strong collaboration and communication with a variety of agencies, with residents in the neighbourhood. This is all really important, and when it's delivered in an authentic way, it can really enhance the possibility of getting a plan accepted by the local community. It goes through the process, and it puts in place a good platform then for strong local relations once the site is delivered and people are living there. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. So whilst there's a sort of spine, if you like, of these success factors, there'll be some key foundation stones that need to be amplified in some areas and not in others. So there's a number of examples that you'll hear from that will talk to you about that. We can talk about that in the Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions that they wanted to raise based on the couple of slides I've run through, please put them in the chat, and we'll then know to come back to those at the end of the Q&A session. But there are some fantastic examples that you will hear from, and it's my great pleasure to hand over next to the fabulous Andrew Savage from Broadland, who's going to talk about what they're doing there.
Thank you, Jo. I'm not sure about fabulous, but that's really lovely. Okay, if I do this, hopefully, yes, it's worked. That's great. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to run through a very quick 10 minutes of an overview of how Broadland Housing has risen to the challenge of providing permanent gypsy and traveller accommodation in Norfolk. The journey began in 2008. We were offered a site, I suppose, to put it, on the edge of Norwich by South Norfolk District Council. It's then continued very recently, it seems recently, but we then decided to work with Norwich City Council to try and deliver another site in the centre of Norwich in a residential part of the city. So something completely different to the first one. So I'm just going to run through an overview before we get to some pictures. Brooks Green, South Norfolk District Council. It was a tolerated site, awful word, but it was a tolerated site. It's been delivered with 8 pitches. It was funded by the East of England Development Agency in 2009. We actually got 100% grant funding at that time, which is unbelievable, to be honest, today. Planning was achieved in 2008, and I will go through that. And we've got a day room of about 36 square meters on the site. And we started to use the good practice design guide of that time in 2008. The site we're working on at the moment is at Swanton Road, which is based in the middle of Norwich. It's a residential part of Norwich called Mile Cross. There's an opportunity there for new and to refurb an existing, so something completely different for us, really. 13 pitches on the new one, 21 on the existing, so much bigger than the first one. So we've got huge learnings here, not just in delivery, but also into management. Funded by Broadland Housing and Homes England, and now Norwich City Council as well, so I've had to go and get some money from them as well. Planning achieved in 2016, and we're in 2021 now, so I will explain why it's taking so long. And day rooms, we've gone a little bit smaller this time on the learnings of what we had at Harford Bridges. So this is sort of the pictures. So Brooks Green, if I talk about that very quickly first, Norfolk has a spine road running through it called the A47. This road brings with it opportunities for the travelling community to find lay-bys and odd bits of land tucked away. So one of these sites became a tolerated site over a number of years by the local authorities, South Norfolk, and the landowner, a lovely chap called Barry Brooks. I must admit, it wasn't to the liking of the adjoining landowner or village, which I found out in consultation and the planning. Living conditions were appalling. South Norfolk asked us if we could try and help. At the time, in 2008, it was a big leap of faith for the association to say yes at board level, director level, and staff team. However, it has been a great experience for everyone. And actually, it shouldn't be a leap of faith. It is actually seen as housing. So interesting, those viewpoints, 11, 12 years ago. Never designed a site before, so we researched, found the standard design guide that was about at the time. It was a good practice guide around the 2008 mark. It was a good start, put in some of my thoughts with the architects, and off we went. First designs were, looking back on it, absolutely dreadful, mainly as somehow we had fenced everyone in. It just didn't create that community design that we were trying to get to. And we've openly admitted that we had preconceptions in our thought time. We were learning, to be honest with you. So what do you do? Well, you go off to the tolerated site. You go off to the site and speak to people. So I went and had a cup of tea one afternoon with the guys on site. Some of the most honest conversations sitting in one of the caravans. And we started to create a much more inclusive design at the time, but still taking some of the design notes from the guide. Planning, full consultation with the village. We ended up agreeing to disagree about a whole host of issues. Adjoining landowner at the time was the head of the British Army as well, which was quite interesting. And the joke was that I had a Chinook following me to the planning committee and from the planning committee back. But we had a very strong planning committee, and that was absolutely essential that councillors had been briefed. We'd spent a lot of time explaining what we were trying to do, and we got consent first time. So I'm just going to pass on. So this is what we ended up with, which was constructed. So you can see the 8 plots. We've got a ground source heat pump here. We've got sedum roofs, and this was back in 2008, 2009 design. And it's been incredibly successful for us and a great learning, to be honest with you. I'm glad it was small at the time. It's worked really well at that sort of size. Why it's worked well for us as well, for housing management as well. We were learning. This was us fresh off the blocks. So it's worked really well for us. And there we are, there's the day rooms. One of these day rooms basically has a living accommodation. It's got a kitchen within it and bathroom facilities within it as well. And with all this, would you believe we forgot to put a window in the bathroom? So everything else we did, and Betsy, who's on site, is still telling me off for doing that. So, but as I say, very open. People could create the community, and we've had some fantastic times up there, to be honest with you. Okay, so the next one was Swanton Road. Now, we had a few false dawns. We wanted to do a second site. We were asked by various local authorities, and for various reasons around Norfolk, they just did not come off. It was either bad locations, it was councillors getting very nervous around sort of May election time. It was a whole host of things going on there that really did, until Norwich came to us, and they came to us because another RP had decided not to go with it, which was a real shame. They had grant allocated for 13 plots, no planning, and time was of the essence because the grant was going. My team came along and looked at it with myself, and we could see that not only had we got the 13 plots they wanted, we got 21 plots which were existing. So this was a much larger opportunity. This is the new build land on the edge. I've sort of identified it there. We got planning within 5 months of actually first seeing the site. We were all ready to go, tendered, absolutely everything ready in 2016. Somebody came along and said, we own that site, we have rights over it. So unfortunately, we went into a land tribunal situation with Norwich City Council. We're running that at the time, and it wasn't until 2020 and this is a delay that happens, occasionally, where people think they've got long-term rights over a piece of land. So in 2020, we've actually got to that situation now where we can begin. So this, again, you can see the same sort of layout as Hartford Bridges, where we had that overview on the 13. Really important, what we found, we've got a compound for commercial waste or commercial activities as well, which has taken all that out of the plot, and we found that worked really well at Hartford Bridges. So it keeps the plot as residential accommodation, so that's really good. Location is actually this time in a residential part of Norwich, so it was great to be able to do the consultations. we do have, you'll see a photograph in a minute, there is a warehouse alongside it, but we're going to have to work really hard on landscaping to sort that out. So we're trying to create a residential scheme that we would usually build. In terms of, I've talked about the land tribunal. We've got much smaller accommodation in this one, a little bit smaller accommodation in this one, from the original 36 to 28. And we found not only financially we had to come down in size, but also actually it works much better. So we could get a much more efficient footprint on the site. They were a little bit too big. So this is how you can see a layout on the screen there, from where you've got the living, dining type or study type area, you've got the kitchen and the bathroom. So a little bit bigger than the utility blocks of the past. This is the existing site on the refurbishment. We are just started planning this at the moment. So the intention is to move various people off this site on into the new site, and that is being managed by ourselves and Norwich City Council. We've already talked to existing tenants about that and how we're going to approach it. We've been very open in all that consultation, and it's absolutely essential to be able to do that. You know, we have to continually talk just to not only build trust, but also build those relationships. Now, talking about trust and relationships, what we found over the years is the contractors are really interesting, because we've got to try and build this. And we found that contractors have built so much risk into pricing because of those preconceptions again, you know, completely. And we have to explain, and we have to, I suppose, build the trust again with contractors. And we have found one in Norwich that actually completely understands what we're doing, has completely taken out the risk, and actually we're at a lower price than we were in 2017, which is really interesting because of that risk that's been built in. So we've learned a little bit as well. And another trick, always check VAT, please, because that lovely little 20%, if you don't get it absolutely right, then you've got a scheme that suddenly goes from working and not working. That is my 10 minutes. So I'm going to actually pass on to Rachel now, if that is okay. And I hope you've enjoyed what I've talked about.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. Let's get this screen going. Great, so thank you so much for joining us today. Ealing is a small housing association based just north of Bristol. I'm just going to chat to you through our experience of delivering and managing Gypsy, Roma and Traveller sites. So as Joe said at the beginning, our organisational vision is to meet housing needs and deliver homes that change people's lives, and we see the provision of homes and services for the Gypsy and Traveller community that directly aligns with that. We own or manage just under 900 properties, but within our portfolio, we've got 88 Gypsy and Traveller pitches, so around 10% of our total stock. Like Andrew, we've been actively delivering Gypsy and Traveller services now for quite some time, since 2013, firstly through the management of 10 pitches on behalf of a neighbouring local authority, through to the development of 2 of our own sites that were delivered in 2015, which I'll come on to in a moment. And now we lease or manage 9 smaller sites on behalf of 4 other local authorities. So we have a dedicated Gypsy and Traveller team of 4 staff, and with the exception of on-site management, our Gypsy and Traveller residents utilise all of our existing maintenance contractors and other customer service functions through our housing team, not through our supported service team. So we see it very much as a core function of our housing service. There was a question in the box around staffing, and just to give you an indication of staffing ratios, we have around 1 Gypsy and Traveller member of staff to around kind of 50 pitches, if that's helpful. So our own sites, we developed these in partnership with the respective local authorities in North Somerset and Baines, and they were delivered in 2015 with part funding from then the HNCA. We significantly benefited from the support of key local councillors, and we would really identify this positive approach by the 2 councils as one of the unlocking factors in the achievement of our planning. The Castle G site, so I'm just stuck on the screen. Sorry, can someone move the slide across? It's not moving across for some reason. Hopefully, yeah, brilliant. There you go. So the before and after there, it's a new site built on the location of a former tolerated Traveller site. and is actually a combined site. So it has 5 transit pitches and 8 permanent pitches, which are predominantly used by new travellers. It's built on greenbelt land, and all of the amenity blocks on the Carswood View site have been designed with green roofs and timber cladding to help the site blend in with the local landscape. A point to note here, sorry, we go to the next slide, is that there's no difference in the provision in design or size between the permanent and transit pitches on Carswood View. So there's questions around potential over provision, but also around really great flexibility of use for the future of that site. Going through to the next slide, please. Greenfields Way is built on a brownfield piece of land in Weston-super-Mare. It comprises 24 pitches, and there are 3 different size pitches on that site, plus the site office. And it's a mixed heritage site with Gypsy Romany travellers, Irish travellers and new travellers in permanent accommodation. And in terms of environmental features, we've got solar panels in each pitch. So in both cases, we would highlight the higher cost of building the Gypsy and traveller sites over general needs housing, and the cost of both developments made the local and national headlines for both our sites. For that reason, we consider it really essential to make sure there's the right funding strategy in place and a really clear, positive social narrative, which helps the investment and planning process land so much more effectively with our own board, with local authority partners, councillors and the public. So the next slide, just to dash through, really touches on some of our learning and the key elements of the design that we think are really successful in supporting feature management. So varying pitch size, I think, just to accommodate different size families and to help ensure the affordability when you're rent setting, and that rent setting has to be done in conjunction with your local authorities. Accessibility, so reflecting the higher percentage of families in the Gypsy and traveller community with disabilities. So we've incorporated 9 fully accessible units across our own sites. Clearly defined and practical pitch boundaries, really helpful for future guidance, and linked in with security. So a range of security measures, including CCTV, entrance barriers and void pitch blockers, but actually they have to be introduced with the collaboration of the residents on site and supported by those residents. It's for their benefit as much as for ours as a provider and for the property on site. And then finally, I'm going to quickly whiz through, because I was asked to touch on the challenges that we've experienced. So on the next slide, please. Even in the context of good design, it's really important to face these, but also recognise that none of them are insurmountable. So for site management, I think I've touched on it, but early engagement with the local authority partners and allocations process and site management plans is absolutely critical. It helps to site expectations, but also to reintroduce new management approaches on existing sites. Minor licence breaches occur frequently, and for more significant breaches linked to, say, health and safety, prompt intervention is really essential. But again, it's about clear expectations and really kind of fair, pragmatic and consistent site management in the same way it would be dealt with in any other general needs housing. We do not encounter a disproportionately high level of ASB on our sites relative to our general needs homes, but it is our experience that antisocial behaviour on the sites can be more serious and intensify more quickly. So multi-agency work is really important in developing that further. And then finally, kind of void management. So the demand for pitches across the whole country is obviously really high, and the pace of turnaround is massively important to ensure the resource is utilised, but also to stem the risk of illegal encampments on the site. And then before we hand over to Naomi and team, I just want to reflect slightly on the challenges of long-standing sites. So there are clearly fewer opportunities to change the design or asset condition on existing sites, and this can lead to challenges and expectations, and it's difficult to apply identical approaches to different sites. So funding for reconfiguration or refurbishment is limited, but we think the ongoing challenge really is to raise the overall quality of accommodation available for the Gypsy and traveller community, and we're keen to find ongoing solutions to this. And then I'll just whiz through that final last slide and hand over to Naomi, but we're really proud to be able to dispel some of these properly held opinions that sites do not work and they do not integrate in the community, because it's just not true. So I've come to a quick end, and I'm really pleased to hand over to Naomi from Teen Housing.
Hello. It's not changing. There we go. Hello, I'm Naomi Metcalf from Teen Housing, and the first slide is how I'd like our site to look all the time. So I just want to make you aware of that. Our aim with our site at Holden Ridge is, if I give you a location, is based in Devon. It's based by the Devon Expressway at Holden Hill, which is the start, and there's woods all around them. So what I'd like to do is to give you an overview of the site and how we got to where we are now and where we'd like to go. Okay, so previously, from 2001 to 2012, this was the site that was at Holden. It was located in the woods, and Teignbridge Council acknowledged that this encampment wasn't suitable for the residents who were living there. There was no sanitation. The residents who were there deserved the same rights as others living in the, in other areas, and also for security purposes. And also it was the protection of the environment around them. So from there, Teignbridge Council provided a site, and on the site, they approached Teen Housing to help manage that. So the site was opened in 2014. There was 15 pitches to begin with water and electricity, and then it expanded, and there's now 18 pitches. What we do find is the people that are on the site, their families grow up and the families don't want to leave. So that is one of the challenges that we have, because everybody wants to stay on the site. I mean, there's only 18 pitches. Staffing and training, I'll go through each of these individually. We were lucky for training purposes. Our first site manager was actually a traveller herself. She no longer works for the organisation, and when she left, we had to do training, because there is a cultural awareness and there's a difference of expectations, and also building that familiarity so they trust you. And we wanted to make sure that was brought in, and also for first aid and bringing in risk assessments for the area as well. And we had to set up new policies and procedures. That's through the allocations. So our allocations follows the same as the Devon Home Choice, but it was open and transparent. So, and on a point system as well. Also, we follow the same policies and procedures as our general needs stock, so that for our antisocial behaviour and rents and rent arrears. So there is the same continuity throughout the organisation. We have looked at also including personal evacuation plans for the site, because we are based in the woods. Looking at the objectives, our objectives are actually to make the site, as we said in the beginning, a nice place for people to live. What we're having difficulties with is ensuring that the hazards and the site matches what our expectations and what the tenants' expectations are. So that's what we're working on. So we've got smart plans for each pitch, and we address those smart plans of the actions that they have to do. What we did have, I've got scales there, you can see. It's very difficult. We've got a manager on site, and she also manages general needs. And she's finding it very difficult doing community liaison work, so engaging with them, but then going forward doing the enforcement if necessary. So what we have agreed is, in some instances, as the managers, I would step in and then deal with that to enable that relationship to continue, but also mutual respect for both and everybody involved. Challenges. What we would find is a lack of ownership of the site. He said, she said, no, it wasn't me, kind of nobody knows who it was or whatever. Our main issue is rubbish being left on the site. What we're finding is when they go to get rid of their rubbish, meaning if it's because they're doing lots of DIY on their, their accommodation all the time, and on their own vans, is that we need to look at, how can they get that to get rid of that. Also, we have skip days up there, but it's a constant issue that we are dealing with, and there's a cost involved in that. We have tried to address that, with them and asked, should we do it regularly to come up and clear it and increase your service charge? But they have decided as a group they don't want to do that. Also, we've introduced under health and safety yearly inspections of the pipework from the gas canisters inside to their appliances. We found that was very, very important, being they have open fires normally, they've got gas canisters outside and there's a lot of flammables around. So we are checking those now yearly. Changes on the site, additional vehicles and caravans, that changes daily. We ask them to remove, and when we go back again, we have additional ones. So that is a challenge that we deal with on a daily basis. During the pandemic, the challenges for the site there was actually, we were worried that self-isolation for the tenants and the residents on the site. So we actually created virtual meetings with them so they were able to speak with us. And if they didn't have access, that they had access and they knew at the time that they could contact us. We created a newsletter and we're still doing that. So they were kept updated during the period of time. And in the middle of this as well, they had a census, and they asked if we could come up whilst the census was taking place, because they didn't know who was coming. So we liaised then with those who were taking place with that. Our achievements, well, during the pandemic, we continued to remove vehicles for health and safety reasons and abandoned caravans in our storage unit. We supplied additional IT equipment because for homeschooling, and we teamed up with Cosmic if anybody wanted additional help with that, how to use the service. The residency group had been started, and we have now a formal constitution, which allows us to apply for funding and things like that and work with them on there. Another one that we have done is with the residency groups, they like to have the Zoom meetings with us, and that has worked quite well. We have a reed bed for the water, and that has all been managed during the pandemic as well. And we had a bit of an issue with vermin, and we have just agreed now that we've got a service going up. So on each of their pictures, they've got attached to them, in the first picture that I showed you, they have a bathroom and a place where they can do their washing up and things like that. So we have now organised for that to be monitored on a monthly basis, and that was requested by the residents. So ongoing consistency is my main message that we have to deliver. Some days I feel like I'm the person jumping. Yes, we've achieved so much and we're moving forward and it's improving, and our relationships up there are really good. What we find is what goes on site stays on site. So we don't get a lot of reports of antisocial behaviour or disputes between neighbours or anything like that. But what we do have is the constant improving the appearance of the site. And that is a difficulty for us, which is addressed regularly. On a bad day, it feels like you've achieved something and then you're addressing it again, but that's something that we are working on to ensure that it's the buy-in, it's their site, and they want it to be the best site that they live on. So that was just a whistle-stop tour of how we are managing at the moment and what our challenges are. I'd like to forward now to Ellie, who's going to be next.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ellie Rogers. I'm the CEO at Leeds Gypsy and Traveller Exchange, and we are a charity working with gypsies and travellers across West Yorkshire to improve homes, health, education and inclusion. A lot of our work is around accommodation in lots of different ways, including supporting accommodation needs assessments, supporting private and public site provision, supporting planning departments with site design, working with residents on existing sites around improvements. We support community action groups on sites, and we support residents associations on site. And we firmly believe that the provision of great homes is a really key determinant in happy and healthy communities. And for those of you that don't know, Gypsy and Travellers have some of the worst health outcomes of any community in the UK, including really high rates of suicide and really high rates of infant mortality. So providing fantastic homes for our members is one of the things that we think can really help to turn the tide on some of the other issues that we try to address, such as health, education and social inclusion. So I was asked to talk a little bit about engaging and involving communities in site design. So I've just tried to build in a couple of key principles, talk a little bit about the wider determinants of health as well. I'm trying to give you some examples from our work too, and it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, as I want to leave time for everyone to ask questions. So I'll crack on with it. So firstly, I just wanted to reference something called the ladder of co-production. So I don't know if other people are familiar with this, but this co-production is a way of working with communities, and that keyword is with. So you could describe it as an equal and reciprocal partnership. So co-production would be our sort of gold star in working with communities. And the co-production ladder describes ways in which we can do with communities, ways in which we can do for communities, and ways in which we can do to communities. So that doing for would be the place where we're in consultation, in engagement, we're giving information to people, we're maybe asking their opinion on that information. And doing to would just be assumptions that people can't be involved, and there's no point in asking them. So we would always be trying to work in a place with partner agencies where we are doing with. And I think we've got some fantastic examples of that. And I think we've got examples of where we've sort of sat in between doing for and doing with. So just wanted to talk through a few of those. So we delivered the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Needs Assessment with Leeds City Council really successfully. We had community members going out as our enumerators and interviewing other people in the community about their accommodation needs. It was a really community-led piece of work. Following on from that, when we had to do our site allocations plan and decide where the new sites would just proven the need for needed to be, we also worked with Leeds City Council's planning department on a really fantastic doing with exercise, where we went to our local horse fair at Lee Gap with maps of the city and potential places where sites could be, and we got lots of different people's opinions on whether those locations were appropriate. We also took some of our members out with planning officers, and we drove around those locations and we had a look around them and decided on whether they were appropriate. We have also been engaged in over the last year in producing a good design guide with colleagues at Leeds City Council, where we have been building up our design principles with community members for new sites that will be built in Leeds. And we've got some really, really strong themes running through that around the inclusion of elderly and disabled people and children, and creating healthy environments for healthy communities. To do that, we embarked on a wide surveying of our members and took that back and worked up some plans with the planning department, and then fed them back to communities, and worked all together till we had something we were all happy with. I would say that one probably sat in between doing for and doing with. I think it could have been more community led than it was, but it was also very good in what we did. So I think we're always trying to hold ourselves to that standard of doing with, and I would encourage everybody else to do the same, because I think those are the principles that will help to build trust with people. And if you want active residents that are taking responsibility for themselves and their communities and their environment, we really need to extend that trust to people and work with them. And that's how people will, become active citizens. We think that there is another really important principle in working with communities as well, and that is being asset-based. So some you might have heard of asset-based community development as a concept as well. And really, the image of the glass tells you what it is in a nice, neat image. It's about not looking for people's needs and problems, but looking for their gifts and assets. And I believe this is particularly important in working with communities that are marginalised and experience a lot of racism and negativity. And it's very rare that gypsies and travellers are talked about in public life in a way that's positive and in a way that looks at their gifts and assets. But anybody that is a gypsy or traveller or knows gypsy or travellers will know that that community is brimming with gifts and assets and talents, and those really need to be focused on and celebrated. I think that gypsies and travellers have a more challenging time in engaging in things like co-production because of the lack of trust on both sides, and that maybe means that we need to give those processes more time and make sure that we are open to that time, and we budget for it, and we want to invest in those relationships. That lack of trust will also be heightened by people's experiences of homelessness and eviction. People might be coming onto your site from their main experience of interacting with housing officers or people from the planning department as being made homeless. So it's going to take them a while to build that trust. I also think we as practitioners need to challenge ourselves and challenge our own assumptions and the racism that towards gypsies and travellers that we are all brought up with in our communities in order to be able to do the very best in helping people to take part in these processes. Asset-based community development asks us to ask 3 questions, and those are: what are residents best placed to do for themselves? What can residents do with some outside help? And what do residents want others to do for them? So I think that would just be a fantastic place for any site provider to start and ask those 3 questions to their residents. And I just had to think about what happened when we've asked those questions to some of our residents. So the first one, what are residents best placed to do for themselves? So when we've asked that question to people on sites across West Yorkshire, we have people running community activities, we have people being fantastic neighbours to each other, we have people spreading awareness around different health issues. What can residents do with some outside help? We've got examples of residents working with the local authority to provide grazing land and have better places for horses to be than on the site. We've got residents volunteering to put in new fencing. What do communities want outside help with? Well, mainly that is on our sites. I would say that's around maintenance, that's around fair processes, around lettings and waiting lists. So I think those questions would be a really good place to start. And I'll wrap up in a second, but I just wanted to cover a little bit on my last slide. So I think sites are really, really important ways in which we can support healthy environments for gypsies and travellers, and we can improve the health of this marginalised community. So we're looking at making places that have green space, that are child friendly, age friendly, disability friendly, and really crucial, and I think someone put this in the chat, community meeting spaces. Community meeting spaces enable all of this community activity to happen. They enable lots of outreach from lots of different services. It's a really, really important thing, and one that all of our residents say they really are in support of. And we also want equitable environments. We want places to be built where people can walk to the shops, they can walk to play groups, they can walk to schools, they can really be included in their local communities. And the third point on there is about using your position, whoever you are as a housing provider, your strategic position to support and champion the needs of your residents. Think outside of the box. If you are aware that there are people on your site that have experienced suicide, go and ask your public health team, how are gypsies and travellers included in your suicide prevention plan? If you're aware that there are health needs on your site, go and ask your public health department, is there a health needs assessment for these gypsies and travellers in this area? There are so many ways in which housing providers could really influence things positively for gypsies and travellers. So I would just encourage you to think about those wider determinants and how important homes are as a part of happy and healthy communities. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
That's great, Ellie. Thank you very much. And I think all of us on the panel today would endorse what you said about the need to tackle perceptions, marginalisation, and all the rest of it. And Just so that people on the webinar know that we are part of a group, and you're welcome to engage with me or Joe directly if you're interested in being part of that group in any form. And it's exactly what we're here to do, is some of the things that Ellie's talked about. We've got about 8 minutes left for questions. I'm going to allocate them, and I need the panelists to be brief in their responses. So I'm going to start. Can anyone volunteer to answer a question from someone who's anonymous, who says, has anyone got any experience or any views on managing gypsy and traveller communities managing sites via a management agreement? I guess a bit like a tenant management organisation type of thing, or a co-op kind of thing. I'm not sure anyone has direct experience on the panel. Ellie or Joe might know a bit about that.
I don't mind starting, and then if Ellie's got anything to add. I think it's like any service, any type of accommodation. I'm sure that this isn't where the question is coming from, but I have been in conversations sometimes with local authorities or a group of local authorities who have wanted to dispose of the site management. They've wanted to take it out of their portfolio, I think because they found it challenging, or they've not known how to do it. And there's been an assumption that gypsies and travellers will necessarily be the best managers of those sites. And like anything, you would need to go through due diligence. It would need to be the appropriate organisation that was going to be managing that site, no different to any other housing stock. So yes, it can be entirely appropriate for an organisation or an individual who's from the gypsy traveller part of the community to manage the site, but it's not necessarily or always the case.
100% agree with you, Joe. It's about making sure that that is equitable process and there are standards upheld. But yeah, it can work really well, and there are examples of it not working really well as well.
Great, we'll push on. Next question is, well, Caroline Richardson asked about really political barriers. I think Andrew talked about that. Rooftop has experience of that too. I think, Joe, we would agree that having political will and buy-in at a politician level, as well as an office level, is absolutely critical, and that can take time. Andrew, any 30-second tip on that, perhaps from your own experience of successfully overcoming that barrier?
I don't know if there's a tip, but you just can't shy away from it, Boris, to be honest with you. You've got to go and hit it head on, really, and go and talk and explain. And if that means that we need to bring in a gypsy and traveller to do that as well. So, you know, it's the same that we would do anyway. You've got to explain. It's about knowledge, isn't it? And that's the way you've got to do it, I think.
Could I add very briefly to that? Because I think Andrew's spot on, but don't make assumptions. This isn't necessarily drawn on a party political bias as to where the support can come from. So I think it was actually in Team where I spoke to two local councillors from different political parties, both really passionate because they'd seen the evidence and they'd been convinced by residents and by the local authority that this was a good idea. So I think be really open-hearted in terms of bringing on board your political allies.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're talking to a local authority. It happens to be Conservative. I'm not making a comment about that particularly, but they're approaching us to see if we can deliver a site with them. So it's easy to assume that you're going to hit a brick wall. It's not always the case. There's an important question from Helen on guidance on how to set rents. I don't know. It's not my expertise. I'm going to ask Rachel if she knows that, or perhaps Naomi, brief as you can. Thanks.
Naomi might be best placed, but we're very much led by the grant criteria, so setting affordable rates in conjunction with those local authorities.
They set our rents, and also for our site, what we look at is every year when there's a rent increase, it can go out to them, and if they disagree, it goes to a tribunal. So we have that as part of our process.
Andrew?
Just a quick point, the difficulty comes is when you've got an existing site and then a new site going alongside it. So you've got different rent levels set on the existing to the new, and that's a really interesting balance. It's just got to be, you've got to be sensible about it, but that's an interesting balance.
And of course, that applies to affordable rent, social rent, general needs, if I can use that terminology slightly inaccurately. T Greenwood, thank you, T Greenwood, has asked a good question. Have you found it beneficial to have community blocks on site to run more community-based gatherings? I think Ellie talked about that. Rachel's nodding. Rachel?
Absolutely, and even if they're not large enough to allow for larger groups, just being able to have those small groups, really, small group work is really valid on every occasion.
Also a space where they can run their own activities and yoga and things like that. It's really, really important. So.
And for IT provision, actually, just part of that digital inclusion agenda, actually, you can bring the IT equipment into that space for use. It's great.
Could I just chip in on that? Gypsies and Travellers are one of the most digitally excluded groups in the UK as well, so you might want to think about free Wi-Fi on your sites as well if you're building any. We've just managed to get an agreement that some of our sites will be covered under free Wi-Fi provision that's happening across Leeds, so really, really positive.
That's great, and T Greenwood's put on the questions there about wanting designs, pitfalls, good news stories. So we have the guide that's got some of those, but do engage with the group. You can email me. I think I put it in the chat or the Q&A. If you want to engage with anyone on this forum or with the forum or join the forum, then you're welcome to do so. I'm going to ask a question from Tristan. To Naomi, the Haldon Ridge site only has one shared day room. Would you have put more in now if you had a new site?
Yes, make it bigger, and yes, because they do use it.
Right, I think last question is from Emma from FFT. I asked, as this does not represent an issue that is relevant in the wider context of national shortage, transit pitches need to be accessible for everyone, not only people with a pitch elsewhere. Living roadside does not mean being at risk of homelessness. They're very different things. Yeah, absolutely. We as a group, we totally get that, and we do talk about that at the forum. I'm going to ask Joe and then Rachel, and then I'm going to close in 30 seconds.
Yes, basically agree. There need to be all sorts of different types of accommodation for different needs, just as we would do with any member of our community. And I think one important thing, and I do it sometimes as well, is refer to the Gypsy and Traveller community like they're different. They're Gypsy Traveller members of our community, and we need different types of housing, and we need to listen to what the needs are on that.
Rachel, do you want to come in quickly there?
Nothing out to Joe personally, but I'm really happy to discuss the particular issue here separately. Yeah. And recognise as a policy approach that we need to pick up as well.
Okay, so that felt like a really quick hour. It went very quickly. There was lots to discuss. It probably was the start of a conversation, not the end. And we're delighted about that, because as a group of housing associations and fellow travellers like Ellie and Joe, we wanted to have the conversation and expand the conversation. So if you want to know more, if you want to get involved, you can get in touch with me or Joe, or indeed some of the others, and we'll plug you into our group, which meets every couple of months and talks about these things and loads of other stuff, all to do with this topic. But we're really pleased you joined us today, and I'm so sorry about my terrible Wi-Fi timing. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Boris. Thanks. See you later.